Okay, um, thank you for welcoming me today. Um I guess my speech will be less funny than the one you had just before. I will talk about the economy. That's my expertise. I'm a PhD in applied economics and teaching at several universities. So what I would like to share with you is my feeling about what's going to happen in the coming years. And I think we are entering difficult, amazing, socially troubled times in the coming years. And to introduce my speech, I would like to skim through economic history and end up with what we see happening in the coming years. So, after the war, and it's good to take a dive into history, after the war we had what we call 30 years of growth. We call this in French les 30 glorieuses, the golden 60s in the US, featured by the rebuilding of Europe, by monetary agreements that were based on gold, and that allowed prosperity, innovation, and more important, decolonization. Decolonization took place in the 60s thanks to the growth we had in Europe. Everything went well until the year 71. In 71, the US decided that the monetary agreements that were in place, the famous Bretton Woods agreements, would be dismantled, and we entered into a totally chaotic world where currencies were not pegged anymore with gold. So the US originally suspended, then gave up the conversion of the US dollar into gold. And that changed totally the economy, because money is a basic concept. Without having, I would say, a stable currency, you cannot make long-term investments. You do not know which currency you should be invested in. So that's extremely chaotic when money disappears or when exchange parities change too quickly. And the 70s have been featured by this chaotic world. At the same time, multiple shocks happened. We had two oil shocks, 73, 74, 78, 79. We had a huge wave of unemployment, like in the 30s, during the Great Depression. We had a surge of inflation, a surge of public debts, and eventually the economy was totally out of control. And I share this with you because my intuition tells me that we could enter into a similar world than the one we have experienced in the 70s. I'll tell you why afterwards. The thing is that the US then decided that they had to recontrol the economy, to recontrol the currency, to fight inflation, and this is when Ronald Reagan became president in 80 in the US. So it changed the world, and we took a dive into what we call today neoliberalism. What does it mean? Nobody knows. It's a kind of freedom given to the economy so that market forces could play a more important role than governments. As simple as that. And at the same time, a new concept, and I have to share this with you, has been introduced, the concept of market economy. When I say the word market economy, you immediately think of capitalism. But the two concepts are totally different. Capitalism means that production means are being owned by the private sector. Market economy means that market forces, through the law of offer and demand, would decide which price and which quantity would be needed to run an economy. The concept comes from market finance. Some of you may have studied finance at university, and you may have heard that a market would work perfectly if all market participants act in a rational way, if there are no frictions to create stock prices, so you have all the time buyers and sellers, no taxes, no nothing, and a market would work if the market is efficient. The concept of market efficiency is often misunderstood. A market is efficient when all knowledge is being owned, worked out by market participants. So it means that the market is efficient, is all information would be factored into stock prices. Of course, all of us are potential market participants. If we own securities or if we are would-be investors, we can be sellers at the same time. On an aggregate perspective, we all of us, the total universe, would own the total knowledge of what has been created, invented, guessed, since the start of humanity. So market efficiency is a concept that is extremely powerful. And it has been used to say that a stock market was creating the right price for everything. And the concept has been transposed into the real economy. So some people made a statement that if market forces in a normal economy, a real economy, would be efficient, then the correct prices and quantities of anything would be exactly what the economy would need. The concept has been perverted, so coming from finance to the real economy. And at the same time in the US, what happened is that social protection has disappeared. Not overnight, but it faded away slowly. And why in the US don't they have social protection? Because they make the assumption, that is today a postulate, that if human beings would be protected by the collectivity, by any kind of social protection, people would not be obliged to give the best of themselves. So the more vulnerable people are in an economy, the more in danger they are, and the more they should do their best to become wealthy, to put meat on the table. The origin of that is religious, because in the US there is a huge Protestant trend coming from the Swiss-based Calvinism that is based itself on predestination. So Reformation created the concept of predestination, meaning that all of us have a path on this earth, and we have to discover the path. We do not know where it is. The more severe sin would be to doubt that God has created a path for all of us. And to discover the path, we have to become wealthy. So the wealthier we are, the more we are on the track that God has created for all human beings. Meaning that if you become wealthy in the US, you have to reinvest what you have earned to tell yourself if you can or cannot become even wealthier on the next day. That creates innovation, because contrary to a Catholic society like ours, where people put money on side on savings account to protect themselves for the future, Americans put themselves at risk, and they innovate all the time by trial and errors, because they want to know if they could become wealthier on the next day. So I work in New York, and this is fascinating. One guy once told me in New York, the difference between Americans and Europeans is that we are not protected in the US, and normally when we start working on Monday, we get fired by the end of the day. Except if we have proved that we could, during the day, bring sufficient added value. You guys in Europe normally should still be there at the end of the year, even if you do not bring any added value to your company, which is not untrue. So neoliberalism and market economy have made a big change, a big shift in the economy. And let me put it this way, it has created a lot of innovation, because without that, we would have stayed in the context of the 70s, where the economy was collapsing. So thanks to this neoliberalism, we could bring growth, we could take billions of people out of poverty, and so it has been a huge success. The problem, though, is that what didn't work was the famous trickle-down effect. So the neoliberalism made the statement that if people become wealthy, they should be able to reinvest the money into new ventures and put people at work. And in order to allow or to stimulate these people to put money at work, then they shouldn't be taxed too much. So neoliberalism went along a decrease of taxation. That didn't work. Because if you take the US situation, you have a bunch of extremely wealthy people, the famous 1%, and you have, I would say, 90% of the population, I wouldn't say starving, but in difficult situations. So the trickle-down effect worked the other way around, because productivity gains, the gains coming from productivity, were captured by capital instead of being given to labor. So when you see, you take a look, you take a 40-year perspective, when you take a look at the increase of wages in the US, excluding inflation, and the productivity gains, you see that they went up like this, although wage remained almost stable during 40 years. And by the way, this has contributed to the election of Trump, because Trump could find the words to explain to these people that they had lost something because of globalization, although the US were the big winner of globalization. And so all these people started to understand that something was wrong with capitalism, hence Trump is coming. Now, where are we heading to? I would say that we are at the start, because of AI, because of digitalization, because of companies like yours, at the start of something that is as big as the first industrial revolution that took place more than 2 centuries ago with a steam machine from James Watt. So originally, the previous industrial revolution were about energy. So the idea was that the human body should be completed, should be automated thanks to machines. And of course, there have been multiple sub-industrial revolutions, like the oil one that took place in the 19th century, the car manufacturing, radio, TV, blah, blah, internet. Today we are talking about cognitive capacities. So that's the ultimate industrial revolution, because the body has been automated, the brain today will be completed by the machine. And people totally underestimate what will happen in the coming years. People take a look at AI as if it would help what they do. They don't understand that AI is there to replace what they do. So you can expect a huge wave, a huge shift, I would say, in the job market, a huge one. And people who are your age, young people, are not at risk because you get used to the change. People in the 40s, 50s will be hurt severely in the coming years. So innovation will come with a total change in the social forces of the economy. And the big thing is that the big social debate will be how to share the famous productivity gains that will come from AI. That's the big debate. Because it's not as if labor would disappear, but the value of labor will decrease to the benefit of the value being given by the machine. That's it. So it doesn't mean that you will earn less, maybe you'll keep your paycheck, but on a relative basis, the gains coming from innovation will be captured by a limited number of companies. And ultimately, we could all be replaced by robots, of course, but then it means that there would be no outcome, no output for the people producing goods. So we will not reach that point, but it could be that this AI revolution would come along with an even growing, I would say, distance between labor and capital, because the capture of these productivity gains. And that's why people are talking about universal income, saying that at some point in time, people should receive kind of monthly allotment to enable them to survive. We'll see what will happen. But this is a big debate, and we see that already happening in the US. Because when you take a look at the 7 major, the 7 tech companies, the stock market value of these companies that is growing like crazy means what? Means that the stock price is anticipating future growth, future income that will be captured by these companies in the future. Of course, discounted back to today because we're talking about a stock market. So it means that when you take a look at stock market valuation, you can intuitively feel that the value will be captured by capital and not being given to labor. And that's a big, 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 big deal, because if we go through a huge wave of unemployment, like it happened in the 70s, that's why I was referring to the 70s, then we'll be hurt severely, severely hurt. And of course, in the first stage, there will be regulation pushing back on AI. There will be rules to prevent companies from laying off people. All these things will happen, but at some point in time, the shift will be there. And if we don't welcome the shift, of course, if we don't welcome this revolution, we'll be totally out of out of innovation. I would say, like it's happening in Europe today. So this is one of the big shifts. The second thing that is important today, I was referring to market economy. I'd say that we are not anymore in a pure market economy where market forces are totally free to develop themselves. Because, funnily enough, because of Trump, the economy today is becoming more political than before. Trump has a vision of the economy that I would say everybody should give his best, like all US presidents have always postulated. But the role of the political forces in the US are changing, meaning that today we cannot rely anymore on globalization. We cannot rely anymore on free trade. All these things are changing, and they will keep on changing in the future. They will keep on changing. So at the same time, we have a revolution, industrial revolution, that will, I would say, create new social forces, maybe revolutions, maybe demonstration, I don't know, name it. And at the same time, we have a country that is teaching us that the free market economy is maybe not anymore the most optimal choice. And this, when you put these two things together, and I could have picked many other things, I'd say that in Europe, we are facing a huge danger, because Europe as such is totally fragmented, totally. The governance of Europe is close to nothing. We are not run by the right people, by the right intelligent and visionary people. And the big risk of Europe is that we are at the same time pushing back on innovation, pushing back on AI, and be unable to reindustrialize Europe. Meaning that we'll be, I would say, between two huge country continents, like China and the US. Both of us are pushing back on us. The US is cutting the ties that we used to have between Europe and them. And at the same time, we see a flood of Chinese goods pouring into Europe because our level of innovation is insufficient to match what they do. So big danger ahead. And of course, if you take this seminal danger for Europe, combined with social forces and AI and the change in market economy, it means that we will go through troubled times, obviously. And the only way, to me, to overcome these hurdles would be a new governance, to accept that we have to free up the economy from all the constraints that we are imposing and let young people like you are develop wealth, become rich, innovative, taking on risk, not be afraid of the future. And the problem is that Europe is today run by too old people, my age, because the baby boomer of this world, the famous boomers as you call them, become a majority, a voting majority in most countries. So they are pushing back on migration, they are pushing back on innovation, just because they are voting, their voting power is more important than yours. So we should put things totally upside down and give all the young people of this planet, of Europe, the freedom to take on risk and recreate a new world. We are far from that today, and this is why I was mentioning that we are entering socially difficult, but at the same time, amazing times. Thank you.
For the talk. Now we received already quite a few questions. So if I can we imagine that the robot can develop without any anti-human guarantee as not harm humans, nor let harm, etc.? The robotic laws in sci-fi.
Well, the robots is an enabler and a danger at the same time. Have you seen that Elon Musk would receive a 1 trillion bonus if he would use or put in place, 1 million robots? I think he will do it. I think that we are 2 or 3 years ahead from having robots in our homes, like it's happening in Japan and some other countries, like it's happening in the US as well. The global problem is not robots. The problem to me is more to know what are the moral values between the use of technology. So, for example, if you use ChatGPT or any other, Grok or Gemini AI, you know that if you would ask questions about intimacy, sexual issues, probably the machine would push back on those questions you ask, meaning that somebody somewhere has decided that these questions couldn't be answered. So the question is to know who is behind that, what are the rules, where is the black box that we don't know, and this is a question that is more important to me than knowing if robots can replace human beings or being dangerous to human beings.
Thank you. Next question. The situation in Europe is critical. Low industries, no energy production capacity, huge debts, slow growth, and AI will be more and more efficient on providing services. What could be the best way to survive or take the lead again?
Well, that's a very good question. There's a guy called Mario Draghi. Last year, he released a report, 800 pages. The exact sum was close to 80 pages. And there was an exact sum of the exact sum of 4 or 5 pages. And the guy is not nobody. The guy used to be Prime Minister in Italy, President of the ECB. At the same time, there was another report, the Letta report. You may have heard of that. Letta is also a former Prime Minister of Italy, and I could work with him. And so the conclusions were the same. I mean, exactly what you say. No industry, no industrial policy in Europe, nothing. Lack of energy, lack of innovation. So the guy makes some statement, and if I would summarize in a nutshell what he claimed, there would be a rehearsal of the educational system and promote innovation everywhere. This report is totally forgotten today because the EU Commission was at the time, and it's understandable why they did that, was busy with the Green Deal. So Green Deal is fine, it has been slightly reduced today, but they put this report aside because, of course, the guy was claiming that we should reindustrialize Europe. So the only thing the EU should do today is to take the report out of the shelves, read it and implement it. But it will be very difficult because, take the US, it's one continent. So, and the strength of the US economy is that the White House has a huge power on private companies. I give you an example. When they wrote the digital plan of the US some 10 years ago, it was made between US authorities and private companies. That was the plan for the US to be the number one, not knowing that AI would show up like it did 2 years ago. In Europe, we have a fragmented Europe with multiple countries, multiple languages. Nobody is able to force industries to work together. And take an example of today. Today, the Germans are pushing back on the cooperation with France on defense grants. They do not want to build this famous new plane together, which means that even for obvious things, nobody is able to force private companies to work together. So we have multiple dangers, but the only thing the Commission should do is not to spend money on agriculture and all these things, but to spend money on innovation. But again, it will not be sufficient. It's also about local regulation, promoting people your age to innovate, give you the freedom to grow. That's the point.
Thank you. Someone asks for a comment on neo-feudalism theory from Varoufakis, and
neo-feudalism.
Asks if we are getting it.
You mean neofederalism from the tech companies?
Sorry?
From the tech company, neofederalism. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Neofeudal. You know what? If you want an answer to this question, you should buy my new book. It has been released on Monday, and I think there are already 5,000 copies being printed. So I explain, and the title of this book is in French, unfortunately, Donald Trump, the spectrum of digital fascism. And I explain in this book, in extenso, what's happening in the US with the alignment between the political power coming from Trump and the tech industry. The one thing you should take away is that there's a perfect alignment between these two worlds, and the tech, the guy, I would say the Peter Thiel of this world, all these guys are proposing an anthropological change in the world. So it goes farther than tech. They want humanity 2.0 or 3.0, whatever. And their claim is to say, and that's dangerous, referring to our first question, they claim that the machine or technology will know better than all human beings, the democracy is suboptimal, and talking about, I mentioned market efficiency when I talk about market economy, their claim goes farther than that. They say markets or machine will be super efficient because they are based on induction, not deduction, so they can create all the scenarios, all the imagination of this world beyond the knowledge that has been accumulated up to today. And so it's a world that is, again, dangerous because we do not know what will be the final outcome of these people. But if you want an answer to that and you speak French, read my books and you get a full answer.
Thank you. Here, one more. Could labor organize itself to demand higher wages when companies grow their revenues/benefits?
To answer this question, you have to read again, if you have not read it yet, Karl Marx. I would say this in French. Il a dit travailleurs de tous les pays, unissez-vous. Workers of this world, unite. Because the Marxist theory, by the way, is today more valid than ever. Because Marx identified that productivity gains would be captured by capital, and he would call that a capital gain, and the sum of this capital gain would create capital. Exactly the situation we're in today. So his reading was, and still valid today, that capital was more, I would say, mobile. How do you say mobile in French? Mobile. The mobility of capital was always more important than labor mobility, because labor is stuck somewhere, and capital can flow from one country to another one. So his statement was to say, please workers, do unite sufficiently to oppose capital mobility, which of course is totally impossible. That's a statement. So there's no way for labor to oppose what's going to happen, except if we have a good social contract whereby, for example, companies should be obliged to pay social contributions. Imagine a world where we'll be replaced by robots, a world where our paycheck will become smaller to the gains being made by companies. We should ask maybe companies to pay social contributions to offset the lack of social contribution coming from labor. So there are multiple ways to look at that, but again, the key point is to know how to share the wealth that will be created. So today, you are better off being a capitalist than a worker, which is not good. Not good. This is why I hate the people who become wealthy because of Bitcoin and all these things. It was too easy. Too easy. This is not labor. This is not working. You see? This is speculation.
Is Belgium, the EU, over-regulated? Can we look at regulation as a force dampening growth?
We are totally over-regulated. We know that. We are gold-plating everything, and Belgium as such, of course, is driven by Flanders. We are close to Germany, so our growth is correlated with the one of Germany. which is good. But when you take a look at the political system we have in Belgium, it's just a catastrophe. It doesn't allow for any major shift or change. Of course, we don't make big mistake, but we cannot accumulate big successes. And it's unfortunate what I'm going to tell you, but I'm kind of disappointed by what happened to Belgium compared to my hopes when I was in the 20s. Somehow disappointed.
Thank you very much.
Okay,
There's quite a few more questions, but I think we're out of time.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you.